So I watched this debate between Dyer and Matt Dillahunty sometime last week. And at first glance, this debate was a lot more interesting than in fact it turned out to be. I tuned in originally live for like the last 20 minutes. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. This theist is really actually accomplishing something. Go theist. This guy's actually cleaning Matt's clock. Go theist. And I got all excited to watch it. And then, I had to go do real world stuff. I don't know, something or other. Sweep the floor. I don't know. What do you do in the real world? I don't even know anymore. I don't know. I'd sweep the floors or something. And then I went back to it later and started watching it from the beginning. And then within the first 20 minutes or so, I was like, oh, well, it's not that great of an argument, actually. It seemed more impressive at first glance than it in fact was. But I'll bring it up. So I watched about an hour of it and then just kind of gave up and stopped watching it. So this is just my first impression. This is just some casual observations. I didn't study it just at first glance. There's a reason why I'm talking about it, because it wasn't quite a really good argument that Dyer was using, but it was close. And there were elements of a good argument buried in there that probably could be fashioned into a really devastatingly powerful, good, case-closed argument. So, what was the point of it? Okay, originally, first thing I'll start off with. It's really obvious to me that Dyer has taken philosophy at a university level, probably grad level. Why? Because I'm a layman in philosophy, okay? So is Matt Dillahunty. Matt Dillahunty makes no, he'll say that outright. He makes no bones about that. But just from a layman's perch, okay, hearing him use the terms that he was throwing around, from my untrained observation, it seemed to me like he was using these terms like coherentism, precisely and correctly. Now that's really hard to do if you haven't been trained at a university level. It's easy if you've been trained. It's not as impressive as it seems at first glance. If you've been trained, and it's easy. Why? Because they drill you in it. You take tests on it, you take quizzes on it, so you have to know the terms precisely, clearly, and accurately. So to use them in a debate precisely and clearly and accurately is really pretty easy to do. If you haven't been trained at a university level, you're a layman like me or Matt, it's really hard to do. You'll trip up over certain words. Let's just take the laws of logic. Let's just take logic. I'm a layman at logic too. I know enough to get by, to understand what people are talking about. If you say an argument is sound but not valid, things like that, I know what you mean. But for me to use those precisely and correctly in a debate, I probably couldn't. I'd trip all over the word. Well, that was sound. I mean, valid. I'd probably spaz out, because it's really hard to know how to train yourself. You have to drill yourself to use these terms precisely and correctly. So as a layman, you aren't going to do it. So what you're usually seeing, when it seemed to me at first glance that he was using these terms correctly, precisely, and accurately, so I was like, okay, this guy has taken philosophy at the university level and probably at the grad level, and taken it for a pretty good amount of time. Having said that, his argument was actually, in the final analysis, pretty weak. And why Matt Dillahunty didn't catch it, I'm not sure. Matt Dillahunty let me explain what his argument basically was. It was very similar. It's sort of a presuppositionalist argument. Again, this is just shorthand. I didn't study this debate. This is just my first watch. Take it with a grain of salt. But this is what it seemed like his argument was. Very similar to the Sye-Ten-Bruggencate presuppositional argument, except a much higher brow, much more sophisticated version of the same argument. There's a thing called coherentism, and coherentism is a form of epistemological justification wherein things cohere together. So, if you're dealing with the proposition God exists, okay, now you can take the proposition God exists and account for things like the laws of logic, because they can now be rationally justified. They cohere. It all coheres together. I'm not quite sure if that was clear, but whatever. Good enough for now. The problem with his particular version of the argument, which he didn't notice, and I'm surprised Matt Dillahunty didn't catch, is that even if you plug in the proposition God exists, okay, atheists, you all should know this, Matt Dillahunty should know this, He's one of the first-rate atheists. Atheist gonna atheist, which means what? Which means every time you assert, you must what? Demonstrate. Every time you assert. What does Aaron Ross say all the time? Faith is what? Belief without evidence. So every time you assert, you got to demonstrate, you got to back up. You cannot assert without evidence. So he asserts God exists at the beginning of the argument. And now he can make sense of all these phenomena, for example, the laws of logic. He can account for them in a coherent fashion. The problem is he is still asserting God exists, not proving, not demonstrating that God exists, asserting it into the argument, plugging it into a framework, and now he makes sense. Now we can account for all these things like the laws of logic. See, one of the things about even knowing logic in a layman's terms is that it trains you to, instead of looking at the surface of the argument, you kind of zero in right away on the structure. And if you zero in right away on the structure, it's easy to do if you're not actually in the debate. If you're in the debate, it's hard to do. Why? It's just hard. You can't catch it in the moment. But if you're just listening to the debate, it's really easy to zero in on the actual structure of the debate. What is the person actually arguing? And once you zero in on the structure of your debate, you'll see right away the flaws in the argument. That's the flaw in the argument. Yes, he's correct. If God exists, he's correct if you frame it this way. If God exists, then we can account for and justify coherently all sorts of phenomena, including the laws of logic. The problem is, he's still, if God exists. He's not proving that God exists. He's just asserting, God exists. Now I can account for the laws of logic. Then he was trying to turn the tables on Matt Dillahunty. See, Matt Dillahunty was addressing it in a way that was correct, but not the strongest counter-argument. Matt Dillahunty agreed with him. Matt Dillahunty was saying to him, I'm not aware that I have to account for the laws of logic. Now, Matt Dillahunty agreed with him. And this is important, because this is why I was interested and why I think there's a really solidly excellent slam dunk argument buried in here, because Matt Dillahunty agreed with him on a couple of essential facts. Essential. He said, I agree that as far as we can tell, the laws of logic are inviolate, which means they cannot be altered. Also, Matt Dillahunty, the atheist, said, I agree that the laws of logic are, as far as we can tell, transcendent. This is very important. Now, if you're a theist like me, and you hear inviolate, transcendent, and you hear the atheist go, I agree with those two things, you're already salivating. You're already like, aha! Why? Because you can see how that's already leading towards a really good case-closed argument. Those are two legs of a potentially devastatingly powerful argument for the existence of God. The problem is, every other theist salivates at those two legs and then jumps to, the laws of logic are inviolate. The laws of logic are transcendent. Therefore, God exists. Therefore, I assert that God exists. You see what most theists do? That's basically what Matt Slick did. He has a version of the transcendental argument that at first glance I thought was really brilliant too. And at first glance, he presented it to the atheist experience, not Matt Dillahunty, the lesser people, and threw them. Honestly, they sent them all into a tizzy, because the first time he appeared on the show shopping his argument, they were all like, I don't know what to say. And then Matt Dillahunty finally came on, and they got like Alex Malpass to come and basically renounce the argument and defeat it, more or less. Because the Christian always gets tempted. There's an argument, this is very similar to in Phaser's 5 proofs for the existence of God. 4 of them are useless. There's one that's potentially excellent too. It's called the argument from eternal truth. Very similar in concept. There are eternal truths. 2 plus 2 equals 4. They are inviolate, as far as we know, and they are transcendent. They exist, it's outside of time and space. So those are facts that atheists agree to. That there is such a thing as the laws of logic, and they are inviolate and they are transcendent, which means they are forever and always true. And they exist out, so they are true today, they are true 500 years from today, they are true 500 years, yes, from in the past. Transcendent. Exist outside of time. Those two things to a theist, if you're a theist who wants to make arguments for God, those should, wet your noodle. You should be, wow, that's pretty close. Those are things that would tend to indicate the reality of God. But as proofs go, they aren't proof. See, most Christians take a couple of pieces like that and then they assert God exists. So it's not a proof. It's still an assertion. J. Dyer was doing the same thing. He was plugging the proposition God exists into a coherentist framework and then saying, look, now we can account for the laws of logic. Great, true, but you're still plugging in God exists. You're still asserting it without demonstrating it or proving it, which means it's not an actual proof of God argument. Now, Matt Dillahunty didn't catch him, which is surprising to me because my understanding of Matt is that he would. He sort of intuitively knew that J. Dyer was jerking his chain somehow. I swear to God, he intuitively knew. This is just my observation. Again, take it with a grain of salt. I only watched it one time. But it seemed to me like Matt Dillahunty intuitively knew that J. Dyer was jerking his chain somehow. He just didn't know how. So he doubled down on the laws of logic, saying, I don't think I have to account for the laws of logic. I'm an atheist. I'm not aware that I have to account for the laws of logic. And that's what they went back and forth on for it seemed to me like an hour, but it was probably more like 5 minutes. It seemed like an hour. You have to account for the laws of logic. Your worldview falls apart without it. That's what J. Dyer literally said. And this is something that atheists do to me all the time, and I catch them on it. So I'm surprised Matt didn't catch him. Your worldview falls apart without it. Okay, his worldview is doing just fine. That's a bold assertion. Matt Dillahunty realized his chain was being jerked at a very sophisticated level, but the guy was still jerking his chain. He just didn't realize the structure of the argument was weak. Why? Because it's basically, he pimped God exists into the argument. Now he can account for everything. Great. You're still putting God exists in there. You're plugging it in, asserting it, sneaking it in there, and then accounting for all these things like the laws of logic. Now, Matt Dillahunty, that's basically the structure of the argument. And then Matt Dillahunty's counter-argument was the weakest possible counter-argument, which was, I'm not aware that I have to account for the laws of logic. You can't make me. And then they went back and forth. It was interesting for a lot of different reasons. It wasn't that interesting. Ultimately, I gave up after about an hour because that's more or less what I saw. And then I was like, okay, nothing groundbreaking here one way or the other. But there's a potentially really good argument buried in there, like a potentially devastatingly powerful one. That's why it was interesting to me. It wasn't done correctly in this particular video, but I could see the beginning stages of a really, really, really good one. See, there's a reason. I won't go into that now because that's too complicated. But there's a there is a way. J. Dyer didn't do it, but there is a way to complete the structure. If there are essential truths that we all agree upon, and Matt Dillahunty agrees on them too. For example, the laws of logic, as far as we know, are inviolate. That's an essential fact. Everybody agrees on it. It's what I'm doing with my epistemology elephant arguments in other videos. Trying to chisel out the essential facts that Christian and atheists do not dispute, all agree upon. And then how an argument is actually structured, if you take premise, that's a fact, take another premise, that's a fact, take another premise, that's a fact, the conclusion, the logical conclusion will follow. And then it's case closed. So there's two facts in play here. The laws of logic appear to be inviolate, as far as we can tell. That's a fact. The laws of logic appear to be transcendent, as far as we can tell. That's a fact. Now, there's something else that needs to be discovered or added to the argument to turn it into a good argument. Because as J. Dyer was framing it, it wasn't a successful argument. As I said, Matt Dillahunty was pretty aware that J. Dyer was jerking his chain on some sort of, highbrow, sophisticated level. He just didn't catch him, which was interesting to me. Because in the past, I think he would have caught him. So maybe Matt Dillahunty's slowing down, or You know, I don't know. I don't know why he didn't quite catch him, but he didn't. So there you go, kids. Overall, you know, again, not that groundbreaking, not that important. I'm just bringing it up kind of just to talk out loud and share my thoughts on it. That is all for now, kids. Amen.